this year in February, Craig Hassall stepped into the role of president and CEO of Playhouse Square after having moved across the pond from London, where he was CEO of the Royal Albert Hall. In this role, he was responsible for the overall commercial direction, artistic direction, and strategic progress of one of the world's most well-known and loved performance venues. When he was approached about the Playhouse Square role, he hadn't heard of Playhouse Square and maybe even wasn't quite sure where Ohio was, but he quickly came to love the historic theaters here in our community. Craig's background spans the globe. To name a few, prior to his tenure at Royal Albert Hall, he led Opera Australia, the National English Ballet, Sydney Theatre Company, and has worked with both the London and Sydney Olympics. Craig has served on the boards of the London International Festival of Theatre, Belvoir Street Theatre, Glen Street Theatre, Object Australian Centre for Craft and Design, English National Ballet School, the Centre for Recent Drawing London, and the University of London. In 2015, he was awarded an Australian Medal for services to the performing arts in Australia, and he has jumped right in, joining Leadership Cleveland class of 2024, and shout out to many of the class of 2024 class members here today. He was recently quoted as saying, "Because I was a little kid from the middle of the countryside who eventually felt that I could go to an opera, ballet, or theater show anywhere in the world, I want Playhouse Square to be accessible to every person who comes here or might want to come here." We are thankful to have Craig here to bring this vision to life. Please welcome Craig Hassall.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rachel, for this very warm introduction, and it's lovely to be virtually here. And thank you, CLC. It's an amazing organization. You guys do extraordinary work. And to my fellow classmates on the call, hello. We are apparently the best class ever. They're already saying that. We've only had one little retreat. And so well done, folks, teammates. So I'm sorry we're not doing this in person because I know we're all sort of a little bit zoomed out after COVID, but at least it means you can check your emails and play Candy Crush whilst I'm speaking. So just, please carry on. So yeah, I mean, as Rachel said, I'm certainly new to Cleveland, and I had never heard of Playhouse Square. I knew where Ohio was. I knew it was next to San Diego. No, I learned so much, and I came here for interviews and various things. And there's a company that took me around called Executive Arrangements, Margie Judd's company. And I had this whirlwind tour of Cleveland in about 3 or 4 hours. We went to Little Italy, Edgewater, raced around Shaker Heights, downtown. We went to Transformer Station, and I had a very, very quick introduction to the cultural and creative life of Cleveland. And I tell you, I had no idea what the cultural assets of Cleveland were. I've learned a lot more since. And my first impressions, and Rachel asked me to give you my first impressions on how I feel now. It's like 7 or 8 months into the role living in Cleveland. I suppose my first impressions were, why have I never heard of Cleveland, Ohio in this way? I mean, Cleveland was always the butt of bad jokes, but I didn't know anything about the cultural and creative industries in Cleveland. I now know a little bit more. And my first impressions were very positive. And I love the fact that we're on a lake. It's a freshwater lake, the Great Lakes holding so much water, and the attitude of the people here. And I must tell you, the reason I took this job coming from London to Cleveland, Ohio, there were 2 things that swung me to make the move across the world. The first was just the wealth of the theaters and the architecture of Playhouse Square. I mean, you have here in Cleveland one of the great performing arts districts in the world. Now, I would say that now, wouldn't I? Because I'm, on the payroll. But honestly, they were my first impressions in September or so of last year. I had no idea that we had here such an incredible treasure trove of venues, all in 1 or 2 city blocks. And actually, I've had now 6 different groups of visitors to Cleveland, either from Australia or from London, who all thought, "Oh, we'll go and visit Craig." And none of them had been to Cleveland before, and they all left with such a positive experience of Cleveland and Ohio, mainly of Cleveland, and have all said, "We're coming back." And in fact, I have a guest at the moment, my former boss from a company in London, who was a commercial entrepreneur, and he's probably the most successful commercial classical entrepreneur in the UK. And I took him and his ex-wife around for the tours of the theaters, and he was, in his words, gobsmacked by Playhouse Square. And not just Playhouse Square, but we've been to Lakeview Cemetery and And the art museum, I dropped them off there yesterday for lunch there. They went to the Chinese exhibition. They were completely blown away by the cultural assets here in Cleveland. So I said to friends half jokingly, if I'd made the wrong decision, I would know by now. Well, I haven't, and I'm here. In fact, I just bought a house in Edgewater, so I'm definitely staying. Um, and the other thing that impressed me about Playhouse Square is just the business model here. I don't know if you know how this works, but Playhouse Square owns about 2 million square feet of real estate. Now, that's extraordinary in terms of financial stability for a performing arts organization. It means that we can take a bit of risk. We weathered COVID, okay. It was hard for everyone during COVID, but I think Playhouse Square was fortunate having a sort of mixed economy model of operation, and that will serve us well. And it also will serve us well into the future with things we might have to do more speculatively in terms of real estate. So that's been a great learning curve for me. I mean, running the Royal Albert Hall was the first venue that I've run, and now running it's actually 12 now. It used to be 11 until last week. So that's very encouraging. So yeah, we have, Playhouse Square had 7, now it has 8 resident companies, many of whom you'll know. The City Club just moved down here last week, and that's a wonderful asset to the existing portfolio of companies who call Playhouse Square their home. And I love the fact that Playhouse Square is home to, theatre companies, a ballet company, a film festival, jazz festival, student performances, all sorts of things. And it's just great. A City Club, being a speakers bureau, just complements that so well. And I also love the fact that City Club already collaborates, really well with, say, the film festival and other bodies as well. So that's been a wonderful thing to oversee in the last 7 or 8 months as well. I have been really, as I probably alluded to a moment ago, blown away by the Cleveland art scene. I didn't know. I'd heard of course, Cleveland Orchestra, because when I was at the Royal Albert Hall, we would host what's called the Proms every year. And the BBC Proms is the world's largest classical musical festival, and they would have about 12 weeks of classical music from all over the world. And the Cleveland Orchestra has been to the Proms several times. And they are regarded, they really are one of the best orchestras on the planet. And they're based, of course, here in Cleveland. The Art Museum, learning more about that incredible institution also, I was just so blown away. It's extraordinary. So I guess we have what I would kind of think of as, this may be controversial, but the 4 kind of cornerstone institutions being Playhouse Square, the Rock Hall, the Orchestra, and the Art Museum. And I've been very pleasantly surprised that I haven't felt in any way at all that there's any competition between those 4 large organizations. We don't seem to compete for donors. We often share donors, we share trustees, we probably share audiences, but we all have healthy audience numbers. And all are doing very well, and all, from my conversations so far, are very open to collaborations. And that's one thing I'm keen to do now, is to talk more to Bill at the museum and Greg and Andre about how can we do more things together, essentially to be stronger together and promote Cleveland as a destination for culture. So that's an exciting thing that I'm starting to develop in my first few months here as well. But I've been very lucky to learn a lot more about the Cleveland art scene beyond those big 4 behemoth institutions. You factor you have, Karamu, the country's oldest Black theatre company, is based in Cleveland. That's a huge badge of honor for the city, and it's a fantastic company. The work they do, the plays I've seen there, are just groundbreaking. Just wonderful things. Transformer Station I saw on my first whistle stop tour, and again, an amazing institution. Dancing Wheels perform here at Playhouse Square, and Mary, who runs that, she's just so full of energy, and they tour all around the world, representing Cleveland in festivals across the globe. Cleveland Public Theatre, I met Raymond, who's he's very enthusiastic, very driven. He has a very, very clear agenda, and I had a lot of time. I think he's a really very clever fellow. And I went to Pandemonium the other weekend, and I met all my new friends from Cleveland. That was wonderful. And and it's funny, an event like Pandemonium. I mean, London has lots of festivals, lots of events, but I don't think a place like London or New York could stage an event like Pandemonium, because it was large scale and physical and musical and dance related and interactive, but it felt so personal. And I just don't think that we get that in a city. A city smaller than Cleveland wouldn't have the resources to stage it. A city larger than Cleveland wouldn't have the intimacy that kind of event brings about. And these are the kinds of things I want to kind of grab onto as the kind of, well, I call it the USP, which is the unique selling proposition of Cleveland. Like, what do we have that no one else has. And I would say Pandemonium is a great example of something that nobody else has. Speaking of things no one else has, the metro parks, I've met Brian and had a look around. I've been to, I think, 5 of the metro parks now. And what an asset. I mean, again, this extraordinary collection of, of open spaces that are for all of Cleveland to enjoy. Just fantastic. And the final one I want to just raise is Kathy Goss is on our Leadership Cleveland Cast 24, and she runs the Lakeview Cemetery. And she's possibly the most enthusiastic CEO I've ever met of an institution. She lives and breathes the Lakeview Cemetery. And if you haven't been to it, go and have a look around. I had some friends from Dublin actually in town. I said, we've got to see this cemetery. Apparently it's really good. So we went out there and we had a wonderful, we spent 3 hours at the cemetery talking to volunteers who were very, very enthusiastic. And I just think, again, what a great, great asset for Cleveland that place is. There are some challenges, and I would say in my remaining 4 minutes, one challenge, and I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way. Now, I'm not from Cleveland, obviously, and a lot of people I've met have come to Cleveland, and the people who are most down on Cleveland are the Clevelanders, and I don't understand that. It's a little bit like I'm probably the Sydney siders are the same about Sydney, by the way, and a good example is the number of times I was told that the river caught on fire. I was like, yes, I know the river caught on fire. And then I heard from someone the whole story. The river caught on fire, as did rivers across the country. Rivers were really polluted, not just here, but all across the country. The reason ours caught on fire is for whatever reason, but the reason it became notorious, there were 2 things. It was an issue, I think it was Time magazine, and on the front cover was Teddy Kennedy and Chappaquiddick. So unfortunately, it was a really high-selling edition of Time magazine, and inside, there was a story about the river catching on fire in Cleveland. But the other more important point was it was notorious because the people of Cleveland used it as a battering ram to establish the EPA under the Nixon government. So actually, these were Cleveland eco-warriors. You know, well done, Cleveland. You were ahead of your time. So you were bashing the government to establish EPA reforms because of that situation. So that was a good thing, not a bad thing. So anyway, I just raised as an example of something I've come across a few times. And I keep saying, look, I'm not from here. I have no preconceptions. I'm judging Cleveland on what I experience, you know, culturally, restaurants, bars, parks, whatever else. And I'm telling you, it's all positive. So, you know, be an ambassador of your own city. It's a strange thing. There are plenty of opportunities. There are so many. I won't have time to go through them all. The first one I'd say, though, is I think collaborations are an opportunity. And I mean collaborations within the art scene here in Cleveland, but also nationally and internationally. We should not set our sights too low. I think it's really important that Cleveland understands that in the arts, we're part of an international community. So don't just think about Northeastern Ohio or just mainland USA. Think about Canada, think about Shanghai, think about London, Australia, and make that your playground, not just the near neighbors. Work with them as well, but don't sell yourselves short, because I'm telling you, coming from working in Australia and the UK, the Cleveland art scene should hold its head very high in terms of what it's achieved and what it should expect in terms of international collaborations. So I just say that's an opportunity for us all. And it's by way of example, the education team here at Playhouse Square, led by Daniel Hahn, have commissioned a new work of The Velveteen Rabbit, which is a 1922 children's story. And Daniel and the team are creating a new work for children. And his ambition is to take that all around the country and, ultimately all around the world. And what a great opportunity for Playhouse Square and for the arts of Cleveland. So there's more and more along those lines that we should be just, again, make our focus broad. Do not limit yourselves, and don't assume that people outside Ohio won't want to talk to institutions within Cleveland. I mentioned the citywide collaborations, and that's an opportunity we should always keep on the radar as well. And the last thing I'll say is, in terms of the roadblocks to success, I would go back to that confidence point. This thing about Clevelanders thinking Cleveland's not really good enough to play outside its turf. That's a roadblock. We have to knock that out of the way and not let it get in the path of success. We don't want there to be silos in terms of organizations. Let's all collaborate and work together because we are stronger together. And I think you'll find that people are absolutely up for collaboration. I know we certainly are at Playhouse Square, and talking to colleagues like Karamu and other organizations, it's something we can certainly look to. And the last roadblock, and I'm going to stop after this because I have 31 seconds left on my iPhone, is funding should not be a roadblock to success. And I say that because I've come from a place where government funding is quite prolific, but comes with a whole lot of strings attached. And I loved being at the Royal Albert Hall where we were not funded by government. We had so much freedom. So government funding is good to a point. It's not a huge factor in the American art scene. Private funding is so much more enormously present here than in the UK, for example. And it should not be seen as a roadblock. If the idea is right and you partner with the right donor, you will have success. So again, let's not make that a roadblock to success, because I think the path is very clear. Rachel, I'm going to stop as I promised after 14 minutes and take questions.
Craig, thank you so much. So let's jump in. And you have an incredibly extensive career, again, across the globe in the arts. How did you come to build that career in the arts, and how is that influencing your approach to leadership with Playhouse Square?
Sure. The first thing I'd say is we all suffer from imposter syndrome, and we all think, why on earth did they hire me, or why did they ask me to do this for them, or whatever? And I think for me, the biggest moment was when I was running the cultural program for the Sydney Olympics. I was very young, I had a very young team, and we had a huge expectation to deliver a cultural personality of Australia to the world in the year 2000 and in the years leading up to that as well. And I suppose to answer your question, my tactic was assemble a really good team that you trust and support and rely on. And to lead them properly, you have to devolve power as much as you possibly can. You are ultimately responsible, but the devolution of power to people that you trust and rely on will mean that you're empowering them to do a really great job. So it only works if you have a really good team that you trust, but you also can't hold all the cards close to your chest. I constantly find that the more I can devolve what needs to be done, the better the success. Of course, you want people to check in with you all the time. And as a leader, you have to set the strategy, but don't get in the weeds and don't go down rabbit holes and avoid the minutiae, because there are plenty of people that want to do that for you, and trust them and believe in them. That's my quick takeout, I would say.
What would you think are the three biggest challenges you see facing Playhouse Square over the next several years?
Goodness me. Well, the first thing to say is we're in great shape, and not because of me. I mean, I arrived here and Playhouse Square came out of the pandemic strongly. It has the highest number of season ticket holders in the country. We have these beautiful buildings and an ambition to do more. I'd say the three challenges are raising the profile of Playhouse Square within the USA and internationally would be one. I'd say the second is being relevant to a contemporary community. And by that, I mean having an antenna to issues of DEIB. You know, we are a very important part of Cleveland community, but to really be that, you have to make sure that your programming, your employment, your stakeholders, your trustees, your donors truly represent the people of Cleveland in all shapes and sizes, races, religions, access requirements, and everything. And that's a huge challenge for any organization, but for a lot of old theaters, it's really challenging with old views and lots of stairs. You know, that's a challenge. And the third challenge, I would say, this is a bit of a personal thing I brought from the UK, is a sustainable future. I've been quite surprised, I have to say, how far behind the US is in awareness of the necessity to fight climate change and just be aware of the climate emergency. I probably sound like I'm proselytizing now, because this is not something people talk about in the US. In the UK and Europe and Australia, every meeting, someone will mention something relevant to climate change. And that's something I see as a huge challenge, not just to Playhouse Square, but to all of us, really.
So you mentioned a few times this idea of trying to elevate these cultural assets, not only Playhouse Square, but everything else we have in our community. What are some ways that you think we could do a better job to spread the word nationally, internationally about what Cleveland has to offer?
Sure. I mean, we have some great institutions here, Destination Cleveland, for example, and Downtown Cleveland Alliance, and so on. There are a lot of organizations, all with a similar agenda to promote and make Cleveland a better place, a more attractive place, and make people more aware of Cleveland. I suppose the one thing that we can all do to help raise that profile is, I mean, job creation, I think, is 101. If we created more jobs in Ohio and also in Cleveland, more people will come and live here. That's really obvious. Now, we can create the jobs, but if people don't want to come for those jobs, we're wasting our time. The creative economy is a really attractive way to make Cleveland an attractive destination to live, work, and play in. So we can create jobs in our own industries, and when we're doing that as much as we can at Playhouse Square, but I think we all have a really important role to play in supporting the ambition of the agencies and government organizations that want to get more people living and working and playing in Cleveland. And we're part of the sell. We're part of the sales pitch. If people knew how amazing Playhouse Square was, what a wonderful rock hall we have, what extraordinary music scenes we have here, and fringe theater and so on, I think that'll go a long way to us being the next Austin, Texas, or the next Atlanta, Georgia, or the next I don't know, La Jolla. I think there's all the raw materials are there, but together we can help promote that and get Cleveland busier.
What do you feel are the greatest opportunities for Playhouse Square that could spearhead to enhance the district and connect it to adjacent downtown neighborhoods?
Oh, that's a great. I'd love to know who asked that question. That's a really good question. It's something I was doing in London. I was very keen on promoting the neighborhood I was in South Kensington, and happily I had next to me a whole lot of big old Victorian institutions like the Victorian Albert Museum and the Natural History Museum and the Royal College of Music and the Royal College of Art and so on. Playhouse Square is kind of a little campus in itself, but happily next door to us, down Euclid, is Public Square. Down Euclid, the other way, is Cleveland State University. And Laura Bloomberg, who many of you will know or know of, is the president of CSU. She's a fantastic leader. I admire her so much. And she and I are absolutely joined at the hip in making this area of Cleveland, working with DCI and K&D and developers and so on, making this a real, we're calling it a spine of interaction. And if we can focus on Euclid Avenue with activations, lighting, outdoor entertainment. I mean, we're turning all our marquees on tomorrow night. Actually, you must all come. There's a free party tomorrow night, the shameless plug. Come to Euclid Avenue tomorrow night from 6 o'clock and watch our marquees get turned on. It'll be good fun. So we're all doing what we can to make the streets more safe, better lit, more active, more animated, and just busier. And I think it is a bit of a case of build it and they will come. We've just spent $13 million on these marquees, and we hope that it'll activate and animate Euclid where we are, then kicking off CSU, kicking off Public Square. I mean, between us all, we will make Euclid more of a destination than it is right now, which is a great ambition to have.
Can you share a little bit more about the genesis of the Marquee project and how it came to be?
Sure. Well, the first thing to say, it wasn't me. It was Gina Vanassi, my predecessor. I give her full credit. It was Gina's idea, and in many ways, it's Gina's legacy. She had a brilliant idea about updating the marquees, and it was about time. And the marquees that we had were all from different decades, and they'd been bashed by trucks and all sorts of things. So they're kind of on their last legs. So we engaged a fellow called Danny Barnice, who's a very talented creative director from Baltimore, but he works a lot in Los Angeles and LA and Dubai and Times Square. And his job is normally to hide buildings with enormous LED screens. The challenge here is quite different. Here, it's actually about celebrating the architecture. So the marquees are designed to complement the beautiful streetscape of Euclid Avenue, but also give you a hint of the interiors of these amazing theaters. So when you come down and have a look at each marquee, and they're all a little bit different. And each one, as I say, celebrates the interior architecture of each of the various theaters. So the Marquee project was designed by Gina particularly to, as I say, animate Euclid Avenue and celebrate the performing arts, but also bring the life of Playhouse Square out onto the street. And I mean, these marquees can sing and dance and play together and play separately. And they have, for example, 2,300 preset lighting states. So we can celebrate Moulin Rouge, we can celebrate The Lion King, Frozen, we can celebrate the Cavs win, the Browns' first game, the 4th of July, St. Patrick's Day, and about 2,270 other things. So it's amazing.
So there have been many cruise ships, Lake Erie cruises, that are coming into port here in Cleveland. Any thoughts to trying to provide tours during their off boat moments here in Cleveland to get them?
Yeah, yes, it's a great question. And I had the same challenge when I was in Australia. I was running Opera Australia, and we were based at the Sydney Opera House, quite a famous building, the one that looks like that. But it was challenging because the cruise ships there's a sort of whole chain of command. So the cruise ships are owned by a cruise line, marketed by operators from all over the world. It's like chasing your tail. You have to find the person who books the onshore activities of the various tour groups who then book the cruise company. So it's a little bit like trying to organize a tour of Broadway for the audience of Hamilton. The problem is they all bought their tickets from different operators and in different states or different parts of the world. So we've got to, and we haven't cracked this yet, but our aim is to find a way to get to the event organizers of the cruise liners to say, how about this, a cruise, come on for lunch or a tour at Playhouse Square. And I'd love to do it. If anyone has any contacts or whatever, please let Rachel know and we'll do it. But it's a good aspiration. There's plenty of them and lots of people. So I'd love to do it.
So let's talk Broadway. So what are you most excited for in our current season, and what shows would you love to see come through town?
Okay, well, every show is great. I have no favorites. That's not true, but I'm not going to tell you. What's great, first of all, I don't know if you all know this, but Cleveland is a really, really important part of the ecosystem of Broadway. We are the most significant touring stop on the tour because of the number of theaters and the size of our tours and the size of our audience base. So we have a lot of power within Broadway to say yay or nay to various shows. And David Green, who's our Senior Vice President of Programming, he and I go to Broadway probably twice a month and try and see 3 shows a visit with a view to picking the next shows for Cleveland. And it's interesting. We don't just pick shows we like. We pick shows that will suit the audiences that come to Playhouse Square. So we might see some shows that we might think that's great, and we'll think, well, actually, it probably won't tour because it's quite specific, or it's not going to resonate with the audiences of Playhouse Square. So the only hint I'll give you is a show that we saw about 2 months ago, which I laughed like a drain from the overture to the finale. And it's a show called Shucked, as in corn. It's all about corn growers of Iowa. Now that may sound really droll and dry. It was the funniest. It's like a whole string of dad jokes all night. It's not offensive. It's very funny. It's great music. So I would probably guess Shucked will make its way to Playhouse Square.
So as you look ahead, what is next for Playhouse Square, and how can those of us on the call today support you in reaching those next steps?
Wow, what's next? So we're just about to embark. We've just worked out our vision and values for the next 5 years. And we're going to share those with our staff in about a month. Then we're going to use those to sort of guide our strategic plan. So we really, I just saw a corn cob in the chat. Thanks, Adam. We would like to share that with everyone. Maybe we do it via CLC. If we share our values and our aspirations for the next 5 years, and in fact, the real estate part of that plan will probably go 10 or 20 years. And I'm really happy to share the sort of overview of that with everyone on this call. And if you can help us deliver that, or there are things that chime with your own aspirations, let us know and we can collaborate on things. As I say, collaboration is the key to success. And, we are all stronger together. So that would be a good take-home message, I would say.